So today we're going to be talking about Rusty and Iris, the great horned owls. And Rusty and Iris are not used to being around humans, never have been, never will be. They were injured as wild owls, which I'll talk about. And because of that, I can't bring one in here to show you or do any other, hands-on things like we've done for other programs like Hold Up Feathers or Skulls or Eggs or Bones or things like that. So for this one, it'll be a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to be sharing my screen so that you can see pictures and videos of Rusty and Iris. And although we have them for a vocal research project, this presentation's not really about the vocal research. This is about Rusty and Iris as individual birds and kind of their stories and what they've been through from their prehistory till now. So let me share my screen with sound. And hopefully everybody is seeing my screen now. You can nod if you're seeing the screen. Is this working? Okay, good, very good. So this is a picture of Rusty and Iris, and I apologize. Most of the pictures I have of them are not super high quality pictures because they're taken with the security cameras in their aviaries. So we have Rusty on the left, Iris on the right. He's smaller and darker. She's larger and paler, which has nothing to do with their genders or anything. Males are smaller though than females. And they have a very definite size difference. And the color difference is just very convenient for being able to tell them apart in the enclosure if you see just one of them. So it all started with Alice. So if you hear an owl hooting in the background here, that's Alice the great horned owl, because she is a human imprint. She was injured when she was 3 weeks old. If you look at her wing, you'll see that this wing droops. That's the one she injured when she fell out of her nest. And they knew it was never going to heal well enough for her to fly. So she was raised around humans to be an education bird. So she would be heavily socialized. She actually imprinted on humans. I got her as an education bird back in 1998. And when her hormones eventually kicked in and she was looking for a mate, she wasn't looking for an owl because she's imprinted on humans. She's looking for a human. So I was there. She did all of her vocalizations towards me and expected me to respond as a male great horned owl. And I didn't know what I was doing, so went to the scientific literature and found out nobody had ever studied them before. So in 2004, I started studying great horned owl vocalizations starting with Alice. And just so you know, this is what Alice's hoot sounds like. Each owl has a unique individual hoot. So if you get to know your local wild owls, you can actually identify them by voice. So this is Alice's hoot. So here's a spectrogram. This is the time axis, and this is the frequency or the pitch over here. So if it's really high pitched, it's up here. If it's low pitched, it's down here. But this is a hoo, 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 hoo. And you'll hear Rusty and Iris sound a little bit different than this. But Alice is the one that started it all. I did what I could with the wild ones and then eventually realized it wasn't possible to get all of the vocalizations and especially the behavioral context. Because so what if they make this sound? The key thing is, what does it mean? What are they saying? And you need to have that behavioral context. Well, seeing that in the wild is difficult. You can have the best webcam on the planet, but you only get what happens right at the nest. So I realized to get everything that I needed to get to understand what was going on, I needed to have a non-releasable pair breeding in captivity. So that's where Rusty and Iris came in. So in 2007, I applied for permits to do this and talked to Marge Gibson at the Raptor Education Group in Antigo, Wisconsin. Absolutely fantastic facility. They're amazing with birds there. And she said she had a pair of birds that I could have for this project that she thought would work together. This picture is actually from 2006. And those of you who watch the cam regularly, if you look up at that lineup of wild owls, you're going to recognize the look on that bird right there. And that is Iris. So you guys are all smiling because each individual bird is so much an individual. They have their own personalities, their own looks, their own color. And that is it's Iris. If you watch our cam, you would be able to pick her up out of that lineup real easy. So she has an injury to her eye. She somehow punctured her eye in the wild. and it permanently messed up her pupil and her iris, hence her name is Iris. So she doesn't really have vision in that eye, but she's exceptionally pale for a great horned owl in the eastern United States. And she's a pretty good sized lady too, and she's got attitude. There's a reason for the word owly, and I think it's female great horned owls. And both Alice and Iris are quite owly. And then Rusty was the other fellow. So here we have Iris here, and then this is her with Rusty. Rusty was hit by a car. They were both injured as adults, so we do not know how old they are. All I know is that Iris was an adult at least by 2006, and Rusty was at least by 2007. Beyond that, I don't know. So when he hit the car, I think one of his wings was broken actually, but the bigger problem was that his eye was significantly damaged. So you can see both of them, their right eye is messed up. And he's a very dark guy. So since I had to get a huge breeding and release training facility built before I was ready to do this, Marge held them and used them as foster parents in the meantime, before we had the facility built. So they did raise young together, although they weren't their own babies, they did raise young together when they were at the Raptor Education Group in Antigo. Building the facility was a huge job. So I basically needed to find crazy people who wanted to devote an enormous amount of time to building enormous flight and breeding pen for no pay at all. And it took a few years to find people willing to do this. And we had Roger Meyer, who at that time was 72 years old. He had done a ton of building projects in his life. He knew what he was doing. And my neighbor, Laurel Oyen, who at the time was 82. So this was in 2010 when they were building the facility. And they basically worked full-time for 3 months, plus a little more before and after that, to build this facility. So it was a massive undertaking to make this happen. And there was a whole lot of people that contributed to making this happen and to donating donating funds to cover the expenses that weren't already being donated. This is Tim Nelson from Houston donating his time and his bulldozer to prep the site. He also did some Bobcat work for us. This is Steve Hoskins from Hoskins Electric. He donated his time and equipment to trench all the way around the perimeter of the aviary so that we could put metal lath down 2 feet down into the ground so burrowing predators can't get in, which has been very helpful because they do on occasion try to get in. And then he also trenched a line that went from the aviaries to our house so that we could bury the internet cable going from their aviaries to the house so that we could have it hardwired and a better connection. Tri-County Electric, now My Energy, donated their time and trucks to drill holes for all the footings around the perimeter of the aviaries. Caledonia Ready Mix gave us a discount on the concrete for the footings. This is the breeding pen framed up and getting ready to go. Charlie Myrie helped with the steel work. Badger Corrugating in La Crosse gave us a discount on the lumber and donated some of the steel roofing for us. So there were so many businesses and individuals and people that helped make this happen. This is a Four Seasons truck from Spring Grove from J.C. Nersted. And although he wasn't able to donate more than use of his truck, Milestone Materials donated all the rock. My dad's cousin did the driving for free. My dad paid for the fuel for this. So all of the rock was free for us. And it was a lot. It was, I don't know, 40 yards of gravel or something. Somebody else donated use of their scaffolding for putting up the wooden ceilings inside the aviaries because the roof is sloped, but the interior ceiling is flat. So we had to have wooden slats. And other people donated the wood. A whole lot of the wood came from, I think there was a tree that was felled somewhere outside of town and some guys that had a sawmill cut it all up and at an extremely discounted rate. And there were just so many people that helped to make this happen. Alan Stankovitz, some of you have maybe seen in pictures here and there. He's our tech wizard. And he spent an enormous amount of time figuring out how to set up our security camera system, installing the cameras, fine-tuning the cameras, making the cameras work with the technology to make it stream. So he is our tech god, and we are very thankful for Alan. And you can see in that picture of him, he's got a stuffed owl here. So we had to practice on something. And we didn't have owls yet, so we practiced on a stuffed owl, of course. And then Ascentech, the local phone company, donated their time and all the wiring. There's a lot of computer wire running out there. I mean, a lot. And they donated it all, and then they always send staff out whenever they need to terminate the cables, which sounds pretty serious, but it just means putting the ends on the cables so we can connect them to things. So we would run all the cable, but then Mike would come out and he would put the ends on there. Ta-da! Finished product. So it's a huge facility. The breeding part is 12 by 36, and the flight part, which is attached by a 2-foot by 4-foot door that opens up that they can fly through. The flight pen is 10 by 60, so the whole facility is 96 feet long. When it's opened up, they can fly the entire length of that. So, yay! We finally had it built. But once it was built, before we had the technology in there, Marge needed to move Rusty and Iris out of her facility because she desperately needed the space. We couldn't put Rusty and Iris in there until we had the technology ready to go. So a falconer in St. Charles, Erica Broberg, held on to Rusty and Iris for about a month before they moved in with us. And when they did move in, there were so many people that had been involved and engaged in this project, from donors to people volunteering and helping in other ways. We decided to have a big shindig for when Rusty and Iris came in. Now, obviously, it was very stressful for them to move here anyway in the first place. So we did definitely add some more stress by having people there, but just short term. So before, when Rusty and Iris were still in their boxes in the house, we had a whole media thing, and TV stations were there, and donors were there, and volunteers were there, and we had owl-shaped cookies and things, and gave everybody a tour of the facility that they helped to create. And then this is a video of Rusty, taking Rusty and Iris out of their boxes. So this is Rusty.
Has he got a rubber strap?
Yeah.
Oh, he's beautiful. Beauty.
This is Rusty. This is the male. We call him Rusty because he's a really dark one. There's a lot of color variation in great horned owls. So there's just a few people in the aviary, the TV stations, and a couple of key photographers we allowed in there. And if you'll notice, you'll see people all lined up around the outside so that everybody else could watch from the outside, and we had just a few on the inside. So I let Rusty go and then took Iris out. She was, as you can imagine, those of you who know her, a lot squirrelier for me to pick up and handle. Letting her go down.
Turn around, turn around. Television.
Put her down so she can see what's going on this way. There she goes.
Now these two have been together a while, so they're out.
So that's their moving in day, and the people dispersed quickly after that. But the wild owl, the wild male also realized that they were there. Literally the first night they were there, he stopped by and started doing all these squawks and wild hoots. Let's see. Come on. There we go. Can you see Iris moving up back here? So that squawk and weird sound is Victor, and Iris is hooting back. So it was interesting that the wild male, I mean, the facility had been there, but somehow it's like he knew the night they moved in and came by and did this. It was the first time I really had a good context for that squawk and wild hoot vocalization. Well, Iris was not comfortable in there. Owls don't adjust to change well, especially great horned owls. And she would fly back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I really was concerned she was never going to be okay in that space. So the poor guys, Hein joined in. He helped with the building some, but he's kind of the key remodeler now. I mean, I'm always asking him, oh, could you change this? Could you fix this? Could you do this? Can you do whatever? But we also had Roger and Laurel helping with this. She was hanging on the chain link, and it's not good when birds are hanging on chain link with their feet. It actually can damage their feet over time. So we had put up slats, we put up boards, we put up all kinds of things. And finally, after a few months, she started calming down, but it did require a lot of modifications. And there were nights I was in tears thinking, this isn't going to work. She's so upset. She's not going to ever calm down here. But she did finally. So when she kind of calmed down, then we had a new wild great horned owl show up that we named Scarlet Owl Hera. Single female, interested in Rusty and wanted to get rid of Iris, and she would harass them like crazy. And this is actually in the middle of the day. We have Rusty here, Iris over here. So that squawk outside was Scarlet. Now watch the window over here. So I kind of had been hopeful that they were going to breed because Rusty was doing what he should do, Iris was doing what she should do, but Scarlet was just harassing them so much. Iris actually threw up on camera more than once. I mean, once it was like, oh, okay, you know, what's up? But it was multiple times, and I finally realized, okay, is something wrong with her? So I took her to the Raptor Center for an exam and check out that facial expression. She is not a happy camper. But they found nothing wrong with her at all. So it probably was literally just the stress of being harassed by Scarlet so much that was upsetting her. So they didn't breed that first year at all. Didn't lay eggs or anything. The next year, they got around to laying eggs. They laid 2 eggs, excuse me. But Iris was really nervous. We don't know if she had bred before or not. But there were cats and raccoons that were walking around the base of the aviary because once she laid eggs, I stopped cleaning. Normally I go in once a week and pick up the poop and the pellets and leftover food. And I didn't because I didn't want to stress her out when she was sitting on eggs. But those cats and raccoons that were walking around would freak her out. She would bolt off the eggs and eggs got jostled around. So they didn't hatch. And we opened them up after the Owl Festival because they should have hatched a week prior and found fully formed chicks that just died shortly before hatching. So the export on unhatched eggs, if you saw the egg program a while ago, we sent him pictures and he's pretty sure they overheated because the female has to sit higher off the eggs just before they hatch. If she sits too tight, they overheat. And they typically, the chicks have a real red wash on them, which these did. So between being scared and bolting and whatever, we think that's what happened. And she didn't re-nest that year. So no eggs the next year either, or no babies the next year either. The next year, very successful, 3 eggs, 3 babies. So we named them the 3 Ps, Pandora, Patrick, and Patience. So this is Iris, Rusty, and I think this is Pandora, Patrick, and Patience. Patience was the youngest, but she was just huge and kind of dark. So Rusty and Iris were allowed to raise them. And then when the kids got to be brats late summer, then we separated them and we trained the kids on live prey. So they had practice catching small rats for, well, I think a few months. And then when they were vocally mature, we opened the door and released them. Oh, we put transmitters on first. Sorry, that was kind of important. Tail-mounted transmitters. because the idea was we wanted these transmitters to fall off, and so they wouldn't have to wear them their whole life or for extended periods after the batteries were dead. So they were mounted to the tail feathers because we knew they would molt those the next year. But then we could track them in the meantime and see where they went and how they did. So this is Bob Anderson and Amy Reese from the Raptor Resource Project. Some of you are probably familiar with them. Bob has since passed away, but we were very thankful for their assistance because I didn't know how to attach a tail-mounted transmitter. So Bob and Amy helped us with that. We released them and things went fairly well. Opened the door. This is the door on the flight pen to the far end, where literally we can just open it up. And by then the breeding pen and the flight pen were separated. So Rusty and Iris were in their part, the kids were in this part. We just opened the door and they flew out. And we kept providing food in case they ever came back, which they didn't. They just flew off into the great outdoors. We kind of had a permit issue. Breeding and releasing require a lot of permits. So it's a special permit to breed, which we were allowed for research purposes. And the research protocol that we had given them at the beginning included release. The permits they gave us said we needed a separate permit for release, but all the way through the process, I kept reminding them, we're planning to release, we're planning to release, yes, we're planning to release. And it was far enough down the road, there was a new person in the permit office. And when those 3 young ones were hatched, they said, we're not going to let you release them. And the whole entire facility was built and designed for release training. I never would have done this project if we weren't going to be able to release. So we had a bunch of back and forth. And finally, they said, we'll allow a one-time release. We'll never allow you to release anymore again, which is not really good for a scientific study because you need more than 1 year of data. So the next year, oh, and actually I skipped one thing here. While the 3 Ps were growing up, Rusty's eye was deteriorating. So literally as soon as we released him, he went in for surgery to have an enucleation, which is literally removing the eye because it was so bad. And for an owl, that is really serious because that's almost like 1/3 of their entire head is their eyeball. So that was done up at the University of Minnesota, not at the Raptor Center. They have an eye specialist across the street from them that did that. So obviously he had a significant recovery period, but we didn't want to have him isolated from Iris. So we put him in the aviary, in the crate, with a sheet over him so that they could at least be in vocal contact in the meantime. And then when we released them together, you'll see on our YouTube channel where you can find our videos, but there's a reunion video that's really, really wonderful when they were able to see each other again. And Rusty's new look, I always think it looks a little bit like he's wearing a beret, but he gets along just fine like that. One of the things they do is develop a head tilt, and they usually tilt down on the side of the eye that's missing. So they warned us that that was going to happen, and he definitely did develop the head tilt. So the next year, I was talking about the permit issue. We knew we could not release young, but we needed to raise more to have more data for this vocal study. So we made the very difficult decision to remove the young ones from Rusty and Iris when they were 2 weeks old. We have to take them to band them at that age anyway, to put a closed band on them to show they were hatched in captivity. And then we kept them, as icky as that was, for 2 reasons. One, we could look at the vocal development of a human reared bird and compare that to a parent reared bird. And 2, we needed younger education birds. Alice was getting older. We knew we needed younger birds. So the idea was to raise them as education birds. It didn't work that great for either because the Ruby and Rupert, the 2 young ones, they lacked the vocal stimulus to do the sounds that I knew the other ones had done. Now, if I played recordings of their parents or they heard the live video feed, then they would make the sounds in context as the other ones did. So that was kind of interesting. It's about context. They don't just make the sounds for no reason. But they were raised in the flight pen once they could fly, which was designed to completely isolate them from humans. And when you're raising them to be an education bird, you want to totally socialize them with humans. So it wasn't great for either one. Ruby wound up being a pretty good education bird. Rupert worked as an education bird for a few years, and he didn't like it so much. So he was later transferred to another facility to be part of a breeding program. So he didn't have to be an education bird anymore. The next year, Hagar and Helga, a wild pair, showed up, and they made Scarlet Owl Hera look like an angel. Hagar and Helga attacked the aviary multiple times every night, night after night, for over a year, I think. They knew they couldn't get in. So we've got Iris down here, and that's Hagar, repeatedly slamming into the screen on the outside. Of a help. Iris does better at defense. Females are bigger, and maybe it's more natural for them to do the defending and the fighting because they're bigger. But that just went on and on and on and on and on. So what we had done, because things didn't go ideally with Rusty and Iris, Ruby and Rupert, for the raising them to be education birds as well as for the vocal study, I just decided I'm going to try and wait out the permit people, because I've had permits long enough to know those permit people come and go and they change all the time. And I thought maybe if we get a new one, we'll be okay. So literally for a few years, we just pulled the eggs and didn't let Rusty and Iris raise babies until, oops, I missed something here. So this is one of the years that they weren't raising babies. But Hagar and Helga, I jumped ahead of myself, sorry. This was a really painful morning. I got a call from one of the chat room moderators. Hagar had attacked the outside of the aviary. Rusty and Iris both went in at the same time and grabbed each other. And this is actually Iris on top of Rusty. It's like she didn't even realize it was him. She was feeling like she had caught Hagar finally, and she stood on top of him for many minutes, kind of grabbing with her feet. And it was super painful to see. She did let go of him. And he did seem to be okay. She seemed to have around his legs instead of having talons in his body cavity. Ugh. So really terrifying, not fun having aggressive owls around like that. That same year, he injured his good eye. So you can see here, his eye should be yellow. It was orange because there was blood in both the frontal and the rear chamber of his eye. So he went back to see his avian ophthalmologist again. He had to be in the carrier again. And after a period of time, it was okay, but there's enough residual goo in the back of his eye, he doesn't see that well out of that eye. So we actually have Christmas lights in the aviary, because after dark, he doesn't see well enough to fly. If it's completely dark in there, he will not fly. So we do have Christmas lights in there to help him. And his vision is still declining. But because I realized, some of the other things that we have to do, this was another year that we weren't raising young. We do have to trim their talons and bills every now and then. You can see this part of the ceiling is open, and they can sit there and get rained on. Usually they choose not to. That helps with beak and talon maintenance. So this is the big blue net that we catch the birds in. So he flies, I hold up the net, catch him, and then we do have to trim talons and beaks. So here's Joe. Sue, one of our other educators, it's a three-person job to do that. So one person's holding the feet, one's holding the body, and the other one's holding the head and grinding down the beak or snipping the talons. So we have had to do that a few times for them. And then when I realized Rusty wasn't getting any younger and his eye was declining, I thought we have to have at least one more year of data. So I made the agreement, we will raise young ones, we will let Rusty and Iris raise them wild, because that's the only way we get good data, but I will find long-term placement for them. And then we had issues because literally nobody in the entire United States was interested in having great horned owls as display-only birds, because they weren't suitable to be trained to be handled on the fist, because they hadn't been socialized when they were young because of the needs of the vocal study. And what was interesting with Sheldon and Sequoia, these were the last batch that they raised, they did not start hooting when the other ones did, because we didn't have wild ones coming in the yard anymore. So it was really instructive that we had this last batch of young, because again, it's about context. We didn't have wild ones for them to hoot back to, so they didn't hoot. Sheldon didn't hoot. I think in the time we had him, which was over a year, he hooted 3 times, maybe in January. That was it, like 3 individual times. That's it. So it was good for the study, but extremely difficult to find placement for them. So because those two were really hard on Rusty, and his vision was declining. Anytime they'd get near him, he would kind of go like this and chitter, like, leave me alone. And the young ones will literally clock their parents off the perches sometimes. We just said, Rusty is not up for raising any more young anymore. So they are officially retired. So this is the permit we have them on here, and Alice retired at the same time already. So it says authorized to possess 3 non-releasable wild great horned owls in a retired status. And they actually have to have retired status because they're required to be doing what they were authorized to do, and you have to file annual reports. So if you're not doing what you said you were going to do, they literally can take them away because we don't own the birds. So retirement is a status that has to be granted, and Alice, Rusty, and Iris all got retirement status the same year. So they're officially empty nesters. They're not raising kids anymore. Rusty's not up for it. Let me stop screen sharing. And I've gone over time just a little bit. Have the questions been getting answered as we go, or are there some other questions that people want to ask? I mean, our chat room moderators are here. Marianne, Maxine, Teach, they all are chat room moderators and are kind of Rusty and Iris experts. So
there are a few questions that I haven't been able to get to. Margot asks, who designed the aviary?
Roger designed the aviaries. He was 72 at the time. He was the guy in the red sweatshirt.
Maykala asks, is that chain link fencing galvanized or coated with vinyl?
They're not vinyl coated ones. Vinyl coated would be a little bit better. But what we were able to get donated was not. So now what we've done, any place where they would likely do anything with the chain link, we have covered with slats now so that they're not hanging on the chain link.
And then there was a comment, eye injuries in owls would appear to be common. Are most caused by collisions with cars, or are they also common in the wild?
Lots of owls come in with eye injuries. So like Iris probably was not a collision with a car, it was a puncture. If you talk to banders, they do see a significant number, I mean, not a ton, but enough to be notable, of owls with misshapen pupils, which are probably from punctures or bumping into sticks or whatever. So it does happen quite a lot, because if you're an owl, your cornea bulges out like this, and the side of your face is the side of your eyeball. So they just like really stick out. It's really easy for them to injure eyes. So eye injuries are common for natural reasons in addition to getting hit by cars.
I do see, so all the baby owls stayed in captivity as a question.
The 3 Ps were released. Pandora, Patrick, and Patience were released. Sheldon and Sequoia went into the same breeding program that Rupert went into, and then Ruby has stayed with us as an education bird.
All right, I didn't see any other questions.
Okay, then I will go out and get Ruby so you can meet her in person if you haven't already. And I will let Joe do a little tech tour of how you can watch these guys and what you can find on our website and our YouTube channel about them. Some of the moderators may jump in because they do this stuff all the time. So they know where everything is and the questions that people ask. So I'll see you back in a few minutes.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen now. You get a lot of screen sharing today. There we go. So if you've not been to our website, the address is internationalowlcenter.org. And if you want to watch our live cam, that's down over here on the side under our research, and you click on live cam. And that takes you to our cam page once it decides to load. So there are a couple of things to notice here. You can watch it from the page itself. You can also watch it from our YouTube channel. If you click that link right here, that takes you directly to our YouTube channel. It doesn't take you to the feed because our stream sometimes goes down, and unfortunately when it comes back up again, it has a different URL. So we can't just link to the video because it wouldn't be online all the time. So you can get to the video, the cam right here. If you want to watch our other videos, you can go down to uploads here. This is the last owl chat that we had. You can go to videos, see all kinds of other videos about our birds. If you can't see all of them, I need to move this window here. If you can't see all of them, you can sort them by newest, you can sort by oldest, or whatever you want. It's taking a little while to load. So we have a lot of videos. We also have several different playlists, and I'm going to be messing with the playlists a little bit, so it'll be easier to find some of these videos. We have all of our online programs listed here. I'm going to close this out. Some of the other links on our live cam page, if you go here, you can see a layout of the aviary, and this is a little bit outdated. There's now a perch sitting over here by the bath pan, and right now the owls are only in this breeding pen. That's the reason for that is Rusty's vision is getting pretty bad, and there were actually a couple of times when he was trying to go through this door, and he actually hit the side of the door. So we've actually closed that, so he can't go through and hurt himself. So they still have plenty of room to move around, but they are restricted to this breeding pen area. Farther down, if you want to support the owls, you can buy them dinner. We do have donations available. You can donate here or mail a check. It does, like it says, it costs us about $25 a day. That should say $7 at this point. Whoops, need to update that website. So if you want to help out the owls and give them a little bit of food, that'd be fantastic. If you want to help with our research, citizen science is a fantastic way to help owls. You can watch our cam and submit observations. So we do have chatters watching quite often, but we don't have a ton of people who are watching. So we like to document whether there's hooting, whether there's weird squawking noises, or different behaviors going on in the aviary. So if you see anything that you think is interesting that you want to report, you can do that in this this field, this words. This you get what I'm going for. If you want to see the different kinds of vocalizations, you can do that from here on the Great Horned Owl vocalization page, because it's not just hooting. There are tons of different kinds of sounds. See, these are all different kinds of hoots. They chitter, they squawk, they make different non-vocal sounds. So there's a lot of noises that they could be doing. If you have questions about our live cam, feel free to tune in to the YouTube channel, and you can chat with our moderators and our other chatters. So you can talk to Maxine and Teach and Ducky and Marianne and anybody else who happens to be on there. They are able to control the camera. So if something interesting is going on, it can get moved around and focus on whatever's happening. Carla and our chat room moderators are in control of that camera. If you want to hear more about the background information of these birds, go back down to our research, and that's down here under background info and history of Rusty and Iris. This next link goes over what happened to the different batches of young. The owl glossary, if you have questions about any terms people are using, you can find out all kinds of information about that. And then if you just have questions in general about great horned owls, you can go to this link here. So I believe that pretty much covers what we have to talk about with the live cams. Maxine, Teach, did you have anything to add?
I think you covered it pretty well.
Cool.
And I see that Carla's back with Ruby, so let's head back to them.
So, ta-da! This is Ruby, the great horned owl. And what's interesting is Rusty's very dark, Iris is very pale, and Ruby is quite red. So there's a lot of color variation in great horned owls. And we actually named her Ruby before we knew how red she was going to be. So she just kind of happened to have a good name. She's busy looking this way because there's a window over there, and it's much more interesting to look out a window than it is to look at a camera for Ruby. So she's probably going to ignore you most of the time. So Ruby was hatched in 2014 on March 8th. So she just turned 6 years old. So that's pretty young for a great horned owl. Rusty and Iris are what, minimum of like 14, 15 years old at least. Could be older. We think Rusty's probably kind of quite an old guy. Alice is 23. If things go well with Ruby, she could be with us as an education bird till she's in her 20s or early 30s. She doesn't have any physical injuries, which is going to make her life much more comfortable. With Alice, we're dealing with arthritis issues because of her original injury. Iris seems to be doing fine with her eye. Rusty, of course, has had issues because of his limited vision. So we have to watch quality of life with him. We really, really, really don't do anything with him at all unless we have to. Because if he gets scared, it's really easy for him to bump into things and re-injure his eye. And there's just really nothing we can do about it at this point other than just be very, very careful with him. But Ruby, being perfectly healthy from day one, she should have a very good long life in captivity because she has no physical injuries that could compromise her health in the future. She's not going to be more susceptible to arthritis or anything like that. So she should be around for a very good long time. And she is kind of our workhorse when it comes to education programs. In a typical year, when I file annual reports, Ruby usually has over 300 programs under her belt, usually more like 350. She does a lot of programs. She's one that commutes to the Owl Center every day, which every day when we're normally open is Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And then during the summer, we're doing 3 programs a day. And the rest of the year, we're doing 2 programs a day. Plus she goes to libraries and to schools, and she handles big crowds of squirmy kids really well. So she winds up doing a lot of the work. Piper, the barn owl, is more skittish. JR is so small, he's hard for groups to see. And Uhu she doesn't like big crowds like that. So Ruby is kind of the one who does a lot of the work for us. She's a pretty darn good girl, aren't you? Although she's got a bit of her mother in her, so she can be snarky and snippy also, but mostly she's pretty good. I see everybody's handling questions about her already. So are there any questions that I should answer, or is everything getting covered already?
We have one, will we breed Ruby?
No plans to breed Ruby. So if you've got a bird on an education permit, you're not allowed to breed them. So you can have a bird that's on a breeding permit that you use sometimes for education, but you can't have an education bird that you breed, because they're kind of different things. If we were breeding her, then she'd be out of commission as an education bird for several months out of the year. And we really need her as an education bird. And then you get into, what do you do with the offspring, which was an issue that we had before. So Ruby probably isn't going to raise babies. She hasn't shown an inclination to laying eggs, thank goodness. Mostly she doesn't say much, but when a wild male comes around here, Alfred is the wild male that's been around recently, and he doesn't bother him too much. But lately, I would say, well, when he comes, sometimes she will hoot back. So if you hear, she's got an upward and a downward hoot, so it goes hoo, 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 hoo. So if you watch the Rusty and Iris cam, you can hear Ruby hooting if she's hooting. So if you hear one that's got an upward and a downward inflection, hoo, 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 that's dear Ruby here. Other questions?
We have a question, how many owls die in the wild?
Oh, probably more than we will ever know. If you think about it, if every territory is taken, which theoretically should happen, but doesn't realistically, and each one of those has an average of 2 kids per year, if they all lived, we would be horrendously overpopulated. So there has to be, quite a bit of mortality so that we're not totally overpopulated with owls. Most of that mortality is going to happen in the first year when they're young and trying to figure out how to hunt and how to stay away from things. Once they get to be adults, they have pretty good survival, but we humans are the biggest problem for owls. If you're this big of an owl, you don't have any natural predators. I mean, in a excruciatingly rare instance, a golden eagle might eat a great horned owl, but they're not regular predators. They can kill each other, which probably does happen. But as far as predators go, we're the biggest problem. So that also means we're the biggest solution. So things that we can do to help them are use traps instead of poison to control rodents. Because if you poison a mouse, it's not going to die for 4 or 5 days. It's going to start bleeding internally, which makes it thirsty. So it's going to try and get out of your buildings in search of water. And then if she's hunting, ta-da, she just ingested the poison. So whatever eats a poisoned mouse, whether that mouse is alive or dead, is taking in that poison and it can poison that animal. So use traps. Glue traps, not so good, non-target. It's not even humane for mice. So other kinds of traps. There's snap traps, there's CO2 traps, there's zap traps that are battery powered. So those are things that we can do to help owls. Leaving dead trees standing when you can is really helpful for owls. So if you're a great horned owl, they like to nest in cavities, but to find a cavity big enough for a great horned owl to nest in, it's got to be a big old cottonwood or a big old silver maple. There's not many of those big dead trees around unless they're really, really lucky. Thanks for looking that way, Ruby. But dead trees, if it's safe to leave them there. Now, if it's right next to your house, different story, but if it's safe to leave them, leaving dead trees standing is a really great thing you can do to help owls. Taking down unused soccer nets. Google owl and soccer net, you'll find a zillion pictures of great horned owls hung up in soccer nets. They're grab it and wind up tangled. Usually they wind up spraining things. Taking down unused barbed wire is another thing you can do to help. If you Google owl and barbed wire, you'll get some really gory pictures. And I've personally dealt with taking great horned owls out of barbed wire fences. They virtually always have to be euthanized. The injuries are really wicked. So nobody's putting that stuff up to injure owls, but there's a whole lot of it up that's never going to be used again. If you're still using it, that's one thing, but if you've just got these barbed wire fences from when, way back when somebody had livestock, please take the barbed wire down to help owls. So there's a lot of things we can do to help.
Several people have asked this and we've kind of answered it, but do you know exactly how much Ruby weighs right now?
I think the last weight I got on her was just over 2,000 grams, which would be 2 kilograms and 2.2 pounds per kilogram. So that's 4.4 pounds. She's kind of on the heavy side.
We have a question. Some human imprints have become aggressive to humans. Have you had any difficulties with your imprinted owls?
Alice is imprinted. Ruby's not, thank goodness. Alice as an imprint, yes, she can be very difficult. She's Jekyll and Hyde, so her home territory here, she can be very aggressive. Yes, she's poked holes in me multiple times, usually in my feet. She can get jealous. She can be really wicked if there are strangers here or if she perceives I'm talking to somebody else. When she's not here, then she's fine because that's not her home territory. So she, yes, can be dangerous. JR, the screech owl as an imprint, he's just like a sweetheart. He's not aggressive with anybody. Piper, the barn owl as an imprint, she is the most dangerous owl that we have. If any of the other staff try and handle her, she will try and rip their face off. Not okay. So the imprinting thing varies by species, whether that works or not works as an education bird and in the situation. So if you had a bird that lived on site and was working where it considered its home territory, that would be a dangerous bird to work with if you have more than one handler. One handler only is much better. If you've got one bird, one handler, and programs are done off-site, that can be fine. So it really depends. It's not a super easy answer.
And along with that, does Ruby think you are her mom?
Ruby, I don't know what she thinks I am. I'm sure she doesn't think I'm her mom because she knows she's an owl. She doesn't think she's a person. She's socialized with people, but basically if she had it her way, she would just stay home and she wouldn't go to work. Because, I mean, if you live out in the country and you've got a nice view of wildlife, why would you want to get into a box, drive in a van, and go sit on a perch in front of 100 people every day? You just wouldn't want to do that. So I don't think she thinks of me other than the person who brings her food and makes her go to work.
In a pair, is the female owl generally the dominant one?
Yeah, the female is dominant, definitely. Watch Rusty and Iris. It is very clear. Rusty is a total sweetheart. I think every female that watches our cam would stand in line to marry him if he was a human, because he's just so doting and so sweet, and Iris is so snarky to him, even though he is so sweet. Yeah, females can be quite nasty.
I got a private question. Can owls get fat? And if they do, what do we do to prevent it?
Owls can indeed get overweight. Oh, nice poop. Thanks, Ruby. So we do weigh them regularly. We don't weight control. Some people will keep them at a lower end, so they're more food motivated. I prefer not to have food motivated birds because they can be overly food motivated and then get aggressive around food. But yeah, you've got to watch what they weigh. What we did with Ruby when she was starting to get too fat, rather than withhold food, we just made her work for it a little bit more, not by making her do specific things and I gave it to her. I cut her food into pieces and put it all on different perches around her aviary. So then she's kind of a clean your plate kind of girl. If you put it all in one spot, she eats it all. But if you put one here, one there, one there, one there, then she didn't eat as much and her weight came down on her own, on her terms, without her perceiving that we were withholding food from her and developing any food aggression.
Do owls get treats or special entertainment?
It's really hard to give an owl a treat. Owls, I mean, offer me an M&M after I just had a big meal and I'd still probably take it, especially if it's a peanut butter M&M. I'm treat motivated. Most people are, most dogs are, owls aren't. They want a meal. They're not really interested in treats. So it's really hard to say, oh, I'm going to give you a treat for this. Ruby doesn't like to be touched and preened. If I try and touch her, she'll try and bite me. JR, the screech owl, though, as a species that alloprenes, they preen each other around the head, and as an imprint, he loves having his head rubbed. So a treat for him as kind of a reward for doing good things is you rub his head, and then he absolutely soaks that up. So it kind of depends on the bird, what they like. And Ruby doesn't have a whole lot of specific things that she really likes other than, you know, let me sit in my aviary and watch the birds out here.
And then when our owls pass away, do we get to decide what happens with their bodies, or does the state or federal agencies control that?
Ooh, very good question. Haven't had to deal with that yet, but I believe on our permits, it specifies that the state gets to determine what happens with their bodies after they die. I don't know if they'll honor our requests. I mean, I would not have them mounted, but like Alice, I would probably request to have cremated because she's an incredibly important and special bird. But we'll see. It's up to the person, whoever happens to be in charge of the permits at the time.
Yeah, they do have stuffed toys to play with.
Yes, they do have stuffed toys to play with. Ruby doesn't play with hers much. JR does. Uhu has a stuffed owl that is special to her. Alice tears up some stuffed animals every now and then. Rusty and Iris really don't care about stuffed animals. And Piper regularly plays with her stuffed animals almost every night. Anything else? Oh, we're like right on time here. Very cool. Nice poop, Ruby. So this is one of the reasons owls don't make good pets, is because they poop wherever they happen to be. And they hoot at night, and they can be jealous, they can be aggressive. You have to have proper veterinary care, and most vets don't know how to take care of them. You don't just go down to Walmart and buy owl chow. We have a freezer full of dead rats and quail and mice and stuff downstairs, and pretty much almost every night for the last 20 some years, I've been cutting up dead animals to feed to owls. And then when you have imprints, they don't like it if you're gone. So then it's not easy to say, oh yeah, I'm just going to go on a trip. I mean, it has to be really, really worthwhile to subject your owls to something like that. So anyway, thank you for coming. Next week, we're going to be talking about feathers again, because our first one, when we talked about feathers, we didn't have enough time to cover everything. So this will be kind of about molt and identification of feathers. And as Joe mentioned early on, we'll have the folks who aren't familiar with Zoom come in 15 minutes early, and then she can walk people through how to operate Zoom. And then we'll be able to start the program right at 10 Central Time, that is. And then I have more time to talk, because I always like to talk. So thank you very much for joining us. Definitely go visit Rusty and Iris on the YouTube channel and chat with Marianne, Maxine, Teach, Ducky, and our chat room moderators there. They know a ton about those guys. So thanks and have a great day.